that simply say, you are an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. So now I'm back to the Great Commission. But now I say, think about this in relation to ministry, specifically. And, I'm really now, I'm talking about what we do in the process of our occupation. So here's the wording again. I have been given, say, over all things in heaven and in earth. As you go, therefore, make apprentices to me. Submerge them in Trinitarian reality and train them so that they do all things I have commanded you. And look, I'm with you every minute until the job is done. Now, you would perhaps have the natural impression that if you were to locate a group of disciples, that's what they would be doing. They would be making disciples, gathering in the presence of God, living there, and learning in the sense of transformation of their thoughts and all of that training, so that when you found them confronted with something Jesus said, well, they would just do it. So here you are, and someone is cursing a disciple. So you would think, okay, the disciple will bless them, because Jesus said, bless those who curse you. That would be the plan. Now then, what I have to do is to raise this issue. Is that what we do? When we think of ministry, do we think of this pattern? Sort of the threefold steps. I do think they have to work generally in succession. You don't want to assume the Trinitarian presence if you don't have disciples. If you have got converts of various kinds and so on, that's different. The presence may be quite different from Trinitarian. And if it is, then you're likely not going to find people naturally progressing to the point to where they would sincerely pray for those who despitefully use them. Now, see, again, you have to put thought into what would that be like. I suspect nearly everyone here has been despitefully used. It's hard to avoid it. What would it mean to pray for them? Well, that's where love would come in. Love would mean you want what is best for them and are prepared to do what is best for them insofar as it is in your power. And, of course, if you love people, it will naturally drive you to prayer, because what you want for them will always be more than you can provide. So prayer is a natural expression of that. And now we have to come back and spend half a day maybe just on the Sermon on the Mount and the things. So I'm not going to carry further there with that. I think you get the idea. So you would see a group of people. I would hope that this would be an ecclesia, a church, group of called out people. And what you would see them doing is being disciples, making disciples, gathering in the presence of God, and learning, teaching how to do the things that Jesus said. So I don't like to get on the critical side, but you have to ask the question, is that what we do? Or do we have what I call the Great Omission? The Great Omission, as I use the language, is omitting to teach people to do everything that Jesus said. Now, this is a simple, straightforward question. It's a question about what you see, what you have, when you look at those who are gathered as Christians. And now, in case you have any doubt about this, I would just have to say, no, we don't see that. And then you can holler back at me. Right? I said years ago, I think it's on page 16 of The Spirit of the Disciplines. I try not to read my own books, but I think that's where it is, that I do not know of a single group that has a plan to teach the people in the group to do everything that Jesus said. And actually, not everything, I mean just a few things. Now, I parallel that, and that was a time when the national debt was much smaller than it is now. I said it's like the government. I don't know of a single government official who has a plan to pay off the national debt. Now, we've got a few people now that are actually working on it, so that wouldn't be quite true. The senator from Oklahoma and Ryan, forget where he's from, they actually are trying to get a plan. Not with a lot of luck, by the way. But it is an interesting comparison. Now, I say here, to follow the Great Commission requires no special facilities, programs, talents, or techniques. Now again, I'm ready for you to holler back at me, but that's what I'm saying here. You don't have to have a special building or a budget to do this. Anyone can do it. It doesn't even require a budget, just the decision to do it and the willingness to learn as you go from the one who has all say and who is with us. This is what the first disciples, a most unspectacular lot, did with spectacular results. I refer here to an old book, William Paley's book on evidences of Christianity, but this has been updated many times. Most recently, help me, I'm having a senior moment, who's the sociologist that's been writing on this, The Rise of Christianity. Which? Say it louder. Rodney Stark, thank you. That's right. And he's written on this. He's a sociologist, and he's gotten tons of criticism about it, but the facts are pretty impressive when you look at what happened for these people who heard this, and of course there are other formulations in Mark and elsewhere, and they just did it. They just did it. Jane and I are faithful attendees and supporters of the Valley Vineyard in Reseda. And they are wonderful people, and the pastors, and they love us and care for us and all of that, and they read the books, but they don't do this. Now, in most cases, what prevents it is they have in their mind a model of what Vineyard does, or what Baptists, or what Catholics, or whatever. And that's what they're looking at. And that is not this. Now, in the details, of course, if you're going to do it, you have to teach certain things and practice certain things. And that doesn't fall within the range of the prescribed Christian activities. So now, falling under the Spirit, that's great. Let's do that. That's Vineyard. Less and less, by the way, but at least that fits the model. And that's what you have to look at. What's the model? What's the model of the person who says, okay, we've done church. Did you teach anyone to bless those who curse you? Well, we ranted at them about it and said they ought to. Did you teach anyone in such a way that they would naturally and actually do that? No, well, we didn't do that. Probably couldn't do that in a morning service. And our people kind of think that when they've done the morning service, they've done it. Right? So now what I'm pushing you all toward here is deep reflection on why we do what we do and whether or not we ought to do something else. See, now, and I certainly would warn you, don't go announce a revolution. You'll just have a fight. Don't go in and say, now we're all going to be disciples. You get some interesting responses, among which would be, aren't we already? Right? So there are lots of interesting things. But that's what we're talking about. This is a seminar retreat on spirituality and ministry. So we have to ask those questions. See, now some of you I know are doing something much more in this direction, but some of you have been pushed out of church as usual because you're doing something else, and you have decided that what you've been doing in church as usual isn't doing it, and you want to see something happen, and so you're doing something different. I can't think of anything right off. It isn't like this is an endless process. You know, we're told what to do, and so then making disciples. I'm not a pastor, and so I have different venues in which that happens, but I do make disciples. Not of me. I try very hard not to make a disciple of me, but disciples of Jesus. And primarily that is a matter of helping people sort of get a different hold on the gospel. What is it? And then getting them to venture into learning particular things that Jesus said. And we will talk more in detail about some of those when we come to deal with the Sermon on the Mount. But basically, I mean, anger is always a huge issue because there's so much of it. So helping people understand what anger is, what contempt is, and moving out of it. I see that constantly going on in people who have said, you know, I really would like to be a disciple. I'd like to learn how to do this. So I don't have a mass movement to show for it, but I know it works. And if you can help people get past the mental barriers, they're ready for it. And everywhere I go for any length of time and just talk a little bit, you have people, as it were, coming out of the woodwork saying, this is what we want. But most of them have never been given an opportunity to make a decision to be a disciple. See, that's the upfront reality. And you want to be filled with the Spirit? Oh, yes, I'd like that. Now, then they have a picture of what that means. And it does not include transformation of character. It doesn't. One of the things I hope you read was the Rule of St. Benedict, for example, maybe Augustine. See, those are all precisely plans for the kind of community that accomplishes what Jesus is talking about. Now, again, if you write a plan, it will be subject to criticism because you or I, we don't know everything, and we can't get it all right. But that's why I've said to you and will say again, being right isn't the only thing. God can bless you even if you're not right. Whew. What a thought. Well, if he can't, There's not going to be many people blessed, are there? So now, don't throw yourself into turmoil about all of this. Just think about it. Look at how it works. Imagine what it would be like to have a church whose main business was teaching people to do everything that Jesus said. And you see, you realize then that you're going to have to work through a lot of stuff. Like most people don't believe it would be safe to do that, to do what Jesus said. If you were to develop a pill that would remove anger, not a lot of people would take it. Because anger is a primary device that they have developed for dealing with their life. So you start out, love suffers long and is kind. Well, most people are out the door at that. And they like to make jokes about patience or long suffering, but they're not particularly big on getting it. Because then how would they manage their life if they didn't have available impatience? How would they manage their family, their children? See, those are the background issues. That's what we have to teach and address if we're going to do anything with this in a church setting. And we'll certainly be marked as heretics if we do that. That's a part of what you get. That's your opportunity to learn how to love your enemies. You'll find a few at church. Then the practice, well, you're my enemy, I'm out of here. I've got another church down here that has a better worship service, a better speaker. So I'm out of here anyway. See, that just abandons the very thing that would help you. Am I making any sense at all? So now, who is a disciple? And I wanted to try to get this in before lunch, and we will have to come back to it. But I have this little screen here, and a good bit of this is in the handbook. But let's just talk about it here. Who is the disciple or apprentice? And an apprentice of Jesus is one who is learning from him how to lead my life in the kingdom of God as he would lead it if he were I. How would Jesus lead my life? It's not what Jesus would do, but what would I do? So I'm with him in all of my circumstances, learning to be like him. Okay. Where am I learning? Everywhere. Wherever I am, that's where I'm his disciple. Now I'm going to say a lot about work and jobs because most of our lives are spent at work. And if that isn't a place of discipleship, discipleship is not going to go very far. On the other hand, only discipleship to Jesus can make the world work. And of course, many people say that's not our job, we're getting people ready to bail out. Doesn't look like that in the New Testament. So we have to talk about place. Where am I a disciple? Well, you can be a disciple at church too. That'd be a good idea. At church, I'm learning how to do church in whatever my capacity is, as Jesus would do it if he were I. So how would he approach sermon preparation? Committee meetings. From within the kingdom of God. So I separate three main aspects, and once again, I'm trying to get this in front of you before lunch because I want you to be able to start thinking about it as we go on from here, and we will return to it. But there are three main aspects of discipleship, and one is just simply learning to do what he taught. He said, listen, don't use someone as the means of stirring up your sexual lust. Don't say to people, you fool. Said, let your yes be a yes and your no be a no. Now you know all that. See, that's just straight out Sermon on the Mount. If someone hits you on one cheek, turn the other. Well, now you have to work all through what that means and how you learn it and so on. And he's giving just a list that are basically illustrations. He's drawing the illustrations from real life. That's why he starts with anger and contempt and lust, because that's the street level stuff. He doesn't start with love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. He doesn't start there. And the elaboration of what love is, he leaves to later people, everyone from Bernard of Clairvaux to Augustine to Wesley. A lot of wonderful people, Bonhoeffer. They spell it out. And that's for us to do. We're here now. We're the ones that have to do it. Understand it. Jesus teaches from the ground up. What are people caught up in? Anger, contempt, lusting, divorcing people, hurting people. That's where he goes there. Now, he doesn't start there. He starts with blessed, because he knows you can't do anything with that sort of thing unless you know what blessedness is. It's only if you know what blessedness is that you can drop anger. So you have to teach that. And that's what he does. Learning to handle the ordinary events of daily life within the principles and power of God's kingdom rule. Running a business, a difficult committee meeting, a family dispute, writing a book, living through some political dispute, running a taco stand, right? Teaching third grade. So, learning to handle ordinary events that he doesn't say anything about. So we're learning that. And then thirdly, learning to act with God's power in bringing the kingdom to bear on obvious human needs, individual and social. You're going to need the power to do the other things. And so I list these three things separately just for purposes of discussion. They are not separate. You can't do one of them and not the others. So that's what we're doing. We make disciples. And of course, we teach people in a way that they can come around and look at that and say, well, maybe I could. Maybe that would be a good thing. It would be a good thing to live without cultivating my lusts, whether they're sexual or otherwise, being free of envy, of covetousness, and so on. That's what we would be learning. But you have to convey blessedness so that people will say, if I don't cultivate my lust, I will not be blessed. They can say, I can drop that and still be blessed. See, the form that temptation takes is always, if you don't do this, you're going to miss out on something good. Isn't that right? That's the way it works. What did Satan say to Eve? You don't do this, you're going to miss out on something good. You can't trust God. God will not pick up your case. So you better do it. That's the general form of temptation. And generally it comes in the form of lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. That's what shapes the world. So you have to have a vision of what is good and what is blessed, that will allow you to look at things that are sinful and say, who would want to do that? Why would anyone want to do a thing like that? Now, there's one piece here on pornography and spiritual formation, and that's an issue that is so big in our world that we have to deal with it. But people are drawn to it because of how they think. You have to change how they think if they're going to be able to look at that and say, who would want to do something like that? Right? And that's what we're aiming at as we teach and train, is to help people come to see that and say, that's slop. Who'd want to stick their head in that? Try sticking your head in the commode. It will be cleaner. Am I making any sense at all? Okay, well, let me go on just to make it to the bottom of 32 here. And we'll talk more about who is the disciple and how that relates to discipline and so on, because the structure of the retreat in terms of the concepts is very simple. There are only 4 or 5 of them, and we'll be fitting them together. One, of course, is discipline. And if you become a disciple, well, then you want some disciplines. Now, but I say here under 5 on 32, this understanding of ministry clears the way for simplicity and effectiveness in what we do. And I give you a number of references here to Paul and how he carried out his ministry. But I think the most important thing to say at this point is that you escape the curse of performance. Now, you have to handle that word carefully because obviously performance is a good thing. We want to be able to perform. But there is a sense of performance which ties it to making an impression. So you're going to perform for an impression. And that's what we want to step out from under. We want to perform well, as we said, we want to do our best. But we want to be free of manipulating the impressions that people get of how we're doing. There was a great Presbyterian minister of other years named Donald Gray Barnhouse. And no puffing, he was a great minister and had a great effect for good. But he came to a large Southern Baptist church in the South and preached and did not give an invitation. Well, he didn't get invited back, even though he was an absolute lion for Christ and had tremendous effect on people's lives. He didn't perform. Right? So performing is often a matter of trying to identify the assumptions in your audience about what is good work and trying to match them. And very often, they don't need that. They need something exactly the opposite. They need something that would challenge their assumptions and might change them. So this is a real burden that we have to deal with, and it's not really a good thing, I think, to quote yourself, but here's something that's so good that I'll quote myself. This is in Renovation of the Heart, and I say, the sufficiency of Christ to all is the basis of our efforts in gathering and in service. The ministers, pastors, teachers, and others should, with time and experience, expect to receive from Christ with them profundity of insight, sweetness and strength of character, and abundance of power to carry out their role in the local group. The minister does not need tricks and techniques, but need only speak Christ's word from Christ's character standing within the manifest presence of God. And that will set aside performance. And I like Larry Crabb's phrase, the pressure's off. And that's where we need to live, where the pressure is off. And if we are able to escape performance by learning to stand simply in the power of the kingdom as we speak and live, then the pressure's off. Okay, questions, comments on all of that now. This part is on ministry. Yes?
One of your favorite sayings is do your best but never trust your best.
Right. That's right. So you do your best, but for the outcome, recognize that God is in charge of that. And so you don't trust your best. Now, your best may not be very good. That's just reality. Sometimes it's not. But God is in charge. You have signed that over to Him. And sometimes your best is very good. And God can bless that too. But you don't rely on your best to bring out the fruit of your ministry that God wants you to have. We still have to decide what to do. And some things are better than others. So that's where we do our best. And that could come under the heading of vision casting. It's a little hard to know what that means until you get into the particular situation. But, for example, if you have a church of an ordinary sort, you have to think about buildings and meetings and those kinds of things. And some things are not as good as others. So we have to pay attention to that. Now, is that your hope? Part of the thing that happened with church growth programs was people began to think that this is stuff that really isn't of God's concern. But you could build a church. You get your parking lots right and your program right. And one of the only times I've ever walked out on a meeting was an individual who was saying that your church would grow better if it was ethnically homogeneous. Is that true? Well, he thought it was true. But if that's what we're putting into our efforts, then I don't want to go there. So we still have to exercise a judgment about what is to be done. So now my point is simply, do your best, don't rely on that. God's blessing and activity, the glorious arm, is much better. And we need to understand that the church has generally been more powerful the less it had. And our problem is never that we don't have enough people. Now, don't worry about me. I'll make these general statements and you come back at it. But generally speaking, I would say that our problem is never that we don't have enough people. It's kind of like piling up matches. The problem is never you don't have enough matches. One of them at least has to get hot. And then you've got a different scene. But it doesn't help to pile more matches on until one of them gets hot. And then action begins. Our attitude should be to find out why they are not and do what we can to deal with that. And for example, if it were to occur to someone to say, well, you know, one thing might be we don't pray, or we don't actually get out and visit people in the neighborhood, or we don't teach people how giving is a part of living in the kingdom of God, right? So what I would say is, we'll try to find out what's wrong. And that would mean asking God to guide us, as well as using our best intelligence and our thinking with others. And very often, it isn't all that difficult to find out what is wrong. Now, then the next question is, why don't they? See, that gets back to the issue of teaching. What do we teach? How do we teach it? See, I mean, nearly all of the problems you will run into in a local church are fairly directly traceable to the lack of discipleship. And again, just to take a simple case of giving. I mean, the rate of giving among Christians in this country is absolutely ridiculous. But now why? Well, that's because they still think they're running their kingdom. And they don't understand that giving is a primary way of participating in the kingdom of God. So we have to teach. And that comes back to what we teach. And Satan constantly hammers us on that. So I think the thing is, you look and you try to find out what's wrong. Now, some of these situations, like, since it's public knowledge, I'll talk about it, like what happened at the Crystal Cathedral. I mean, anyone who looked at that closely over the years would say something's wrong before it went kabust. But the teaching didn't deal with that. Okay, well, Kurt, you have a word or two for us, and then we'll go to lunch.
So hi to all of you. My name's Kurt Fredrickson. If I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, some people say I'm in charge of the Doctor of Ministry program. I think the Doctor of Ministry program kind of controls me. But it's a delight to be with you. I apologize that I didn't get here till Thursday of this week. Normally I'm in here on the first day. But I've been kind of all over the country this week. First part of the week I was in Washington, D.C. at a really significant event called the National Jewish Evangelical Conversation. This is the fourth time that we've been together, half evangelicals, half people from Jewish faith, getting together just talking about the things that we have in common, as well as the things that where we see things differently, like Jesus. It's a really important conversation. We are still learning how to trust each other and talk to each other, and just a whole lot of issues. But it's really good to get together. On the evangelical side, names like Jim Wallace were there, and Joel Hunter from Orlando, and David Neff from Christianity Today. So it's a really, really important conversation that we're a part of. Then yesterday I was up in the Bay Area in Oakland. One of the major funders of our Center for Lifelong Learning puts on a lunch for all the people that they distribute money towards. I thought it'd be a good place to be. So we're up there yesterday. I'm really glad that you're a part of this class. Normally when I'm here on Monday, I say this is going to be an amazing experience for you. We're at day 4. You know that this is an amazing experience for you. The tagline for the Doctor of Ministry program that we don't publish, but is the one that we really live by, is this program will disrupt your life. And this class, I think more than any other class, really speaks into that sense of disruption that comes into your life. It creates a mood. Dallas and Keith create this mood for how to do ministry and life, because all of life or ministry flows out of life, and you're picking up this different mood on how to be people of faith and ministers of the gospel. So I'm glad that you're here and that you're taking time out of your very busy lives to get this degree, and also particularly to be a part of this class. So I know it's good for you. I trust that it'll continue to be good for you as you finish this week and go into next week as well. And I just wanted to say thanks and glad that you're here.